But behind that image lies a brutal truth. Generations of injustice, ruthless systemic racism, and shattered dreams have shaped millions of lives. This isn't just the story of two women. It's the story of a new generation demanding a future they were never meant to inherit. They stood. They spoke. But what did they say? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The hall held its breath. 100 conversations stilled into murmurs as Jasmine Crockett stepped inside, her figure framed against the towering wooden doors. She moved with quiet purpose, her tailored suit neat, her expression composed, but the weight of the moment pressed gently against her ribs. She wasn't just entering a room, she was stepping into a lineage built by those who had fought long before her. Faces turned, some curious, some knowing, and she met their gaze with a nod that said, "We carry the same fire." The soft lighting caught the glint in her eyes as she moved toward the front, each step threading her deeper into the promise that this gathering held. She didn't rush. She didn't shrink. She let the silence acknowledge her presence without apology. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, "This is bigger than you. Step forward anyway." Then a shift, almost imperceptible at first, the way a room senses a storm before it breaks. The back doors opened, and there she was. Oprah Winfrey. No stage lights, no entourage, just her, and yet the very air seemed to realign around her arrival. For a heartbeat, no one clapped. They just stared, stunned into stillness by the sheer inevitability of her presence. Then the applause began, rising like a wave Jasmine could feel vibrating in her bones. She turned, and in that instant, their eyes locked. Jasmine's wide with awe, Oprah's steady and warm, as if seeing a future she had long hoped would come. Oprah's smile reached across the space between them, gentle and sure, and when she spoke, it felt less like words and more like a door quietly opening. "I've been watching you for a long time." The room hushed into a different kind of silence, the kind reserved not for performances, but for confessions. Oprah stepped forward, her hands relaxed at her sides, her presence filling the space not with grandeur, but with a simple, undeniable gravity. Her voice, when it came, was soft, yet sharp enough to carve through the breathless air. "When I was first hired at a television station," she began, "I thought I had made it. I thought hard work and preparation had opened the door." She paused, letting the memory settle between her and the crowd, every face leaning closer, drawn into the quiet fracture in her tone. "But it didn't take long before they sat me down. A man in a crisp suit, someone who smiled like he meant well, told me that my hair was too ethnic, that if I wanted to stay on air, I needed to adjust." Her voice didn't break. It didn't need to. The calmness made the violence of the words even clearer, sharper. She looked out across the room, her gaze sweeping past Jasmine and into the invisible past she carried with her. They said America wasn't ready, that the audience would be uncomfortable. A thin, bitter smile crossed her lips, gone in an instant. They offered me solutions. Straighten it, lighten it, tame it, make myself smaller, safer, palatable. The words hit like slow, deliberate hammer strikes. Jasmine felt them land in her own chest, each syllable another reminder of the quiet betrayals stitched into so many so-called opportunities. Oprah inhaled deeply, her shoulders rising and falling in a slow, deliberate rhythm, as if breathing life into the girl she had once been, sitting in that office, being told her very existence needed edits. "It wasn't just about hair," she said, her voice steady now, low and resonant. "It was about erasure, strand by strand, smile by smile, compromise by compromise, until there would be nothing left but a version of me they could control." For a moment, no one moved. The chandeliers above flickered slightly, or maybe it was just the shimmer of tears in more than a few eyes. Oprah stood in that stillness, not pleading for sympathy, not asking for outrage, but offering a piece of herself, whole and unvarnished, to those who needed it most. Jasmine's hands curled lightly in her lap, knuckles whitening, not from anger but from recognition, an understanding so deep it didn't need words. Across the hall, breaths were held, throats tightened, hearts broke and rebuilt themselves within the span of a single story. Oprah's voice softened, almost a whisper, but it carried as if stitched into the bones of every person present. They wanted to edit me into something safer. I chose to stay whole instead. The weight of Oprah's story still hung in the air, wrapping around every breath, pulling the room into a deeper silence, as if the walls themselves were listening for what would come next. Jasmine shifted slightly in her seat, feeling the edges of old memories scrape against the surface of her calm. She didn't rush to fill the silence. She let it stretch, let it breathe, because she knew the truth deserved more than hurried words. Her hands folded loosely in her lap, but her voice, when it came, was steady and sure, each syllable carried with the careful weight of lived experience. When I first got elected to Congress, she began, her eyes not looking at anyone in particular, but seeing everyone all the same, I thought the hard part was getting through the election. A soft, almost bitter smile flickered across her face. There and gone. Turns out, winning wasn't the finish line. It was just the start of a whole different fight. She paused, the memory pressing down against her ribs. It wasn't the shouting on the house floor that cut the deepest. It was the little moments, the compliments that came with a but, the friendly advice wrapped around a warning. She blinked once, slowly, as if clearing the sting from her eyes before it could surface. Nobody came right out and said it. They didn't have to. It was there in the glances, in the quiet little nudges. You look strong, Jasmine, but maybe try something softer next time. You're passionate, but maybe don't push so hard when you talk about race. Your natural hair is beautiful, but have you thought about straightening it for the cameras? Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the armrest, a tension she'd trained herself not to show. They never told me to stop speaking. They just told me how to package myself so people would feel comfortable enough to listen. Her voice didn't crack. It sharpened, low and even. It wasn't hate. It was something quieter. It was survival advice, dressed up like a compliment. For a long moment, she let the silence reclaim the room, a silence so dense it seemed to hum in the walls. Then she turned slightly toward Oprah, her voice dropping lower, more vulnerable, more raw. Was there ever a time you thought about giving up? She asked, her words trembling with the weight of unspoken struggles. Not because you couldn't fight, but because it would have been easier just to live a little quieter. The question didn't hit like a hammer. It unfurled, slow and heavy, like a secret long hidden. Oprah's eyes softened, and in them Jasmine saw not just memory, but resilience, and something fiercer still. Love. Oprah let the moment settle fully between them before answering, her voice wrapped in steel and sorrow. Only for a few seconds, she said, every word deliberate, each syllable a step back into every battle she had survived. Then I remembered, I'm not just living for myself. And in that breath, the whole room seemed to understand that neither were they. The echo of Oprah's vow lingered, threading through the stillness like a current, drawing everyone deeper into a conversation too honest to be escaped and too vital to be ignored. Oprah straightened slightly, her voice slipping into a steadier current, low and deliberate. There was a time, she said, scanning the room slowly, when racism didn't hide. It didn't whisper. It shouted. It sat right in your face and dared you to act like it wasn't there. Her words dropped into the space like stones, heavy and undeniable. Now it's different. It dresses itself up in awards, fancy resumes, and glass offices you can see into, but never get through. A low murmur stirred across the room, raw and restless. Oprah's eyes didn't accuse. They simply revealed, stripping away the polite layers everyone knew too well. It smiles at you in meetings, it applauds your speeches, and then it shuts the real door behind you when you're not looking. Jasmine sat a little straighter, feeling every word land hard and true, and for a heartbeat, no one even shifted in their seats, like the whole room forgot how to breathe. Jasmine leaned in, her voice steady but pulling straight from somewhere deeper. How did you break through that? She asked, her words simple, real, cutting straight to the bone. How did you get past a system built for people who don't look like us? Her eyes stayed locked on Oprah, no anger, just the raw urgency of someone carrying too many hopes in one pair of hands. How did you stand there being you, when everything around you was telling you to change? The room felt smaller suddenly, drawn into the gravity of her question. How did you not just fit in, but change what success was supposed to look like? Her voice cracked just a little at the end, but she didn't pull back. She left the question hanging there, open, waiting, not for a speech, but for something real. Oprah's expression softened, not pity, but a kind of fierce respect. And the silence between them pulsed with a different kind of power. The kind that builds something new from everything that tried to break you. Oprah let the weight of Jasmine's question settle between them, then drew a slow breath, as if pulling memory from a place deeper than pain, deeper than anger, a place made entirely of survival. Oprah's gaze swept gently over the crowd, and when she spoke, her voice was calm, but carried a quiet fire. Back in the 1980s, she said, if you turned on the TV, almost every face hosting a talk show looked the same. She didn't rush. She let the memory unfold naturally, like reopening a door she had once been told was locked. They were polished, composed, and white. That was the image people were told to trust. She paused, letting the raw simplicity of the truth settle into the air. When I first sat behind that desk, with my brown skin, my full voice, my heart open, I wasn't what they expected. I wasn't what the executives thought audiences wanted to see. Her voice dropped a little lower, more certain. To them, I wasn't safe. I was a risk. And for a long time, a lot of people just waited, thinking I would fail, because the picture they built of success didn't have room for someone like me. She let her hands fall lightly to her sides, a quiet refusal to shrink. But I didn't show up to fit into anyone's picture. I showed up to be real. The room seemed to still even further, as if the very walls leaned closer to hear the next words. Oprah's expression softened, not with nostalgia, but with something fiercer, pride earned the hard way. And somehow being real was enough. She let the simple truth hang there, powerful in its plainness. The Oprah Winfrey Show didn't just stay on air. It became the highest-rated talk show in television history. A ripple went through the audience, a crack in the held breath of hundreds of people. But no one interrupted. Oprah's voice warmed, stronger now. And I didn't have to change who I was to get there. I didn't have to hide. I didn't have to become someone safer. She paused one final time, and when she spoke again, her words felt like they were stitched directly into the hearts of everyone listening. Sometimes just being yourself in a world that keeps asking you to change is the bravest revolution there is. For a long, stretching second, the room was frozen, caught between the weight of everything she had survived and the breathtaking, simple act of her standing there. And then the applause broke loose, a roar that rolled through the hall like thunder, fierce and unstoppable. People rose to their feet without even thinking, their hands coming together with the force of something bigger than just clapping. It was pride. It was recognition. It was a whole room standing not just for Oprah, but for every battle, every silence broken, every impossible dream that refused to stay buried. As the roar of applause faded into a softer, lingering thunder, there was no sense of relief in the room, only a deeper hunger, a silent understanding that the hardest stories had yet to be told. Oprah took a small step forward, her hand brushing once across her hip, as if steadying herself before opening another door most would rather leave closed. Her voice when it came was quiet but unflinching. Early in my career, she said, I got a job at a TV station in Baltimore. It felt like everything I had worked for was finally falling into place. Her words carried the hope of a younger self still vivid under the surface. But it didn't last long. They called me into an office one afternoon, two executives sitting stiff behind a polished desk. She paused, and the memory seemed to ripple through her bones. They said I wasn't fit for television, that I didn't have the look, that my presence made people uncomfortable. The way she spoke, plain, unadorned, only made the injustice sharper. It didn't matter that I worked twice as hard. It didn't matter that I cared more than most. What mattered was that I didn't fit into the picture they had already framed. A shiver passed through the audience, subtle but real, as if hundreds of shoulders tightened at once. Oprah didn't need to raise her voice. The weight of the truth did all the lifting. I packed up my things and walked out of that building with everything I owned fitting into one box. For one terrible second, I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I really didn't belong anywhere. I sat in my car outside that building, gripping the steering wheel so tight my hands went numb, wondering if I had just watched my whole life close its door. And I promised myself one thing. She let the words hang for a breath, letting the silence carry their gravity. I would never again let someone else tell me how big my life was allowed to be. Her fingers flexed once at her side, almost unconsciously, a flash of defiance not spoken but lived. Across the hall, people leaned in, their faces tense, their hearts caught somewhere between fury and admiration. Jasmine's hands resting on her lap, curled slightly, a mirror of battles too familiar to name. For a few long seconds, no one even shifted in their seats. The room wasn't just listening, it was holding its breath with her. Jasmine leaned forward slightly, catching the moment before it could slip away, and when she spoke, her voice was low but clear. "It's never the loud attacks that hit the hardest," she said, her gaze drifting out across the crowd. "It's the slow cuts, the times you're told, without anyone saying it out loud, that you don't belong unless you bend yourself into something smaller." She swallowed once, visibly, but didn't flinch. I remember going on national television, speaking out about voter suppression. Her words sharpened with memory, each syllable pressed tight. And after the interview, my phone lit up with people telling me I was too angry, too direct, too black. She let out a soft, almost soundless breath, the kind that came from remembering blows taken in silence. I wasn't supposed to speak like that on camera. I wasn't supposed to make people uncomfortable. Her hands, still steady in her lap, curled a little tighter, but her voice didn't break. I was supposed to smile, nod, and make it easier for them to ignore what was happening. The room had gone so still that even the small creaks of the floorboards under shifting feet seemed too loud. Jasmine didn't rush to fill the space. She let the truth breathe, sharp, raw, undeniable. "But I didn't change," she said simply, "and for that, they tried to drown out my voice. But here's what they forgot." Her voice lifted just a little now, steady and sure. Each word carried on a current too deep to silence. The more they tried to push me down, the stronger the ground grew beneath my feet. She turned slightly toward Oprah, a bridge built from one life to another. Because every scar we carry isn't proof we lost. It's proof we survived. Her eyes burned, not with tears, but with a fierce, defiant pride. Oprah nodded once, slow and sure, as if sealing the words in the air itself. And then she spoke again, quiet but ringing through the space like a bell in the dark. "Resilience doesn't erase the scars." She let that truth settle like dust in the lungs. "It turns them into badges of honor." For a moment, no one moved. There were no gasps, no shouts, only a slow rising pulse of something heavier, deeper. Then almost all at once, a wave of small but heartfelt applause broke out. Not wild, not showy, quiet, deliberate, the kind of clapping that said, "We see you." Hands came together in a slow, measured rhythm, the sound like rain starting to fall after a long, brutal drought. Across the room, faces tilted downward, not in shame but in reverence. It wasn't pity filling the air. It was recognition. It was gratitude. It was the sacred understanding that the strongest warriors are not the ones who never get hurt. They're the ones who carry their scars like banners and still keep walking forward. The applause faded into a soft undercurrent, but the energy in the room stayed charged, as if everyone knew the conversation was about to shift. From surviving the world as it was to daring to rebuild it from the ground up. Oprah's voice softened, but the fire in it didn't dim. "After years of being told where I could sit, what I could say, and how much space I was allowed to take up," she said, her words deliberate and clear, "I realized I didn't want to wait for someone else to hand me a seat at their table." Her hands opened slightly as if she were laying the truth bare between them. "I wanted to build my own table, my own room, my own rules." She paused, letting the words land, solid and undeniable. "That's why I started Harpo Productions. I wanted to tell stories, my stories, our stories, without asking permission first." A ripple of silent awe ran through the crowd, a wave of understanding not shouted but felt deep in the chest. "Owning the narrative," she said, her voice low but fierce, meant owning the power to shape the world we live in? Her eyes gleamed under the soft lights, not with pride, but with something deeper, freedom paid for in full. It wasn't about rejecting the old system. It was about refusing to wait another second for it to recognize me. Around her, the air thickened again, heavy with the realization that real change never asks. It builds. Jasmine leaned forward slightly, her hands tightening just a little in her lap, her voice threading into the thick, electric silence. "Were you scared?" she asked, the words direct, without polish, as if drawn straight from her chest. "Starting something that big, was there ever a moment you thought it might all fall apart?" Her question didn't come from doubt. It came from somewhere more vulnerable, from the small, silent place inside everyone that wonders if courage will be enough. The room leaned with her, hundreds of faces holding their breath for the answer. Oprah let out a soft, almost private laugh, not mocking but remembering. "Of course I was scared," she said, her smile gentle but edged with iron. "But you know what scared me more?" She looked straight at Jasmine, and through her to everyone listening. Waking up years later and realizing I had let fear steal my life from me. The words cracked something open in the room, a pressure that no one had even realized they were holding in their chests. For a heartbeat, no one even blinked. Jasmine let the truth of that answer settle deep inside her before speaking again. "That's why when I ran for office," she said, her voice growing stronger with every word, "I didn't ask anyone for permission." Her words struck like steady drum beats, small and sure. "I didn't wait for the consultants to tell me what to say. I didn't smooth out my edges to make myself easier to sell." Her eyes lit with a fierce, quiet fire. "I wrote every speech. I chose every word. I made sure every poster, every slogan, every message carried the truth. Not the version of me they thought voters wanted, but the real me." Her hand pressed lightly against the table, as if grounding herself in the memory. "They said it was risky. They said it was reckless." She smiled then, not soft, but proud. "But I decided I'd rather lose being myself than win being someone I didn't recognize." The weight of her words pulled the room tighter around her, every breath held in a quiet, swelling reverence. For a long second, the room stayed frozen, a tightrope of emotion stretched from one corner to the other. And then, like a wave gathering unstoppable force, the applause broke through. It wasn't loud at first. It was sharp, sure, the kind that came from deep in the chest. Hands clapped together in a rising storm, not just for Jasmine's victory, but for the defiant choice to exist on her own terms. Some people stood without realizing it, their chairs scraping back across the floor, pulled to their feet by something too strong to resist. It wasn't just admiration filling the space now. It was something heavier, richer, solidarity. It was the sound of a room choosing not just to believe in change, but to be part of it. The applause slowly ebbed away, but the energy in the room stayed alive, thicker, heavier, as if everyone knew the next words would cut closer, deeper, stripping past victories down to the raw truth beneath them. Oprah leaned in slightly, her hands resting lightly on the table, and when she spoke, her voice was low, but carried like thunder through still air. "You can argue with numbers," she said, her gaze sweeping the crowd, anchoring each listener in place. "You can spin facts. You can twist statistics into knots." She paused, her next words dropping slower, sharper. "But you can't argue with real pain. You can't twist away someone's lived truth." The room tightened, the silence sharpening, stretching over their heads like an invisible wire. Oprah let the weight of it settle fully before she continued, her tone steady, unwavering. "Pain speaks a language that cuts through all the noise. It demands to be seen." Her hands moved once, briefly emphasizing the point not with force, but with finality. "And sometimes," she said, her voice almost a whisper, but felt like a hammer, "that is the only thing strong enough to break walls too high to climb." Every breath in the room felt thinner now, drawn tight with something heavier than sadness. Recognition. Jasmine inhaled slowly, steadying herself before she spoke, her voice threading into the charged silence. "A few years ago," she began, her hands resting open on her lap, "my mother collapsed outside a hospital. She didn't rush. She let every word find its place. She made it inside, barely, but they didn't treat her. A shudder moved invisibly through the crowd, but Jasmine's voice stayed firm. They said she didn't have the right paperwork, the right insurance, the right anything. Her hands tightened once, then released, like a tide pulling back. She sat there in that waiting room for hours, getting worse, while nurses and doctors walked by like she wasn't even real. The memory burned behind her words, but she didn't flinch. By the time someone helped her, it was almost too late. Her voice dipped lower, each word landing like a stone dropped into a still lake. That day changed more than just her life. It changed mine. For a moment, the room sat suspended, held aloft by the breathlessness of collective grief that wasn't their own, but suddenly felt very close. Jasmine looked down briefly, gathering herself, and then lifted her head higher, her voice hardening, not in anger, but in resolution. I told that story in front of Congress, she said, each word clear, cut from steel. I didn't come with charts or polls or policy briefs. I came with the truth. Her fingers tapped lightly against the table, the tiniest of sounds in the vast quiet. And for the first time, the room stopped pretending it didn't understand. She drew a breath, steady and full. That story helped pass legislation to protect patients who can't speak for themselves. It didn't fix everything, but it cracked something that had stayed shut for too long. Her words didn't rise to a shout. They dug deep and stayed there. She turned slightly toward the audience, not to seek approval, but to share something heavier than pride. Personal stories, she said, her voice almost reverent now, can rip through walls colder and harder than any argument ever could. The words vibrated in the stillness, sinking into the ribs, the marrow, the bones of everyone listening. For a few long heartbeats, no one moved. Then slowly, quietly, it happened. The soft sound of hands meeting hands, not in applause for performance, but in honor. Heads bowed slightly, eyes glistened without shame. It was not celebration, it was mourning. It was gratitude. It was the shared, aching understanding that sometimes the most powerful weapon you have is simply the truth of your own survival. The quiet honor of the room still lingered, but beneath it, a deeper ache stirred. The pain not from enemies, but from the wounds left by those you thought would stand beside you. Oprah's voice softened, losing none of its power, but carrying an older sadness now, one that lived below the surface of triumph. When I started to succeed, she said, her hands folding loosely in front of her, it wasn't just the critics in boardrooms I had to face. She paused. In that breath of stillness, it felt as if 1,000 invisible knives twisted through the air. Some of the harshest voices came from people who looked like me, people who once cheered when I broke through. Her gaze darkened slightly, not from anger, but from a deep, bone-weary knowing. They said I had gone Hollywood, that I wasn't real anymore, that I wasn't black enough to speak for them. The words didn't rise in pitch. They landed soft and devastating, a quiet wrecking ball through the air. It hurt more than anything those networks or executives ever said, because when the people you fight for turn their backs, it cuts deeper than any stranger's knife. She let the silence grow thick around her, letting the truth do its own slow burn through the room. Jasmine shifted forward slightly, her voice steady but low, threading into the heavy quiet like a hand reaching into darkness. I know that hurt, she said simply, and the simplicity of it made it hit harder. When I spoke out against injustice, it wasn't just opposition from the other side. Her eyes lowered briefly, then rose again with a steadiness forged in fire. It was whispers from my own community, people saying I was too loud, too angry. She swallowed but didn't falter. Some said I wasn't really fighting for them, that I was making it about myself. Her hands curled lightly in her lap, invisible battles playing out in the small tightening of her fingers. Hearing that from people you would bleed for, it carves out a kind of loneliness no victory can fully erase. She paused, letting the sting of it settle naturally into the air between them. But you learn, she said, her voice hardening just enough to hold steady, that standing alone in the truth is better than belonging to a lie. Oprah turned slightly toward her, the two women locked in a silent bond thicker than blood, deeper than agreement. It was the shared scar tissue of survival. Together, almost as one voice, they said it, not loudly, but with a clarity that cracked the silence wide open. Real light always makes the shadows run. For a few long heartbeats, the room didn't move. Heads bowed slightly, eyes glistened. No one cheered, no one clapped. Instead, there was a slow, collective exhale, a sound closer to prayer than applause. Across the hall, grown men blinked back tears they didn't bother hiding. Women pressed their hands to their hearts as if steadying something that might break open. It wasn't a moment of sadness. It was something holier. It was the deep, wordless acknowledgement that sometimes the greatest fight isn't against the enemy outside. It's holding fast when the people you love ask you to sit down, and you rise anyway. The room sat heavy with the weight of shared wounds. But under the sorrow, a new current began to stir. One not of grief, but of fierce, urgent determination. Oprah straightened slowly, the slight shift of her body changing the very air around her, as if bracing for a moment that might split the ground beneath their feet. Her voice, when it came, was low but carried with it the quiet force of a rising storm. "It's not enough," she said, her eyes sweeping across every face, "to survive what was built to break us." The words landed heavy, real, undeniable. It's not enough to just endure another system designed to shut us out one more time. She paused, and the silence around her bristled, electric with expectation. We have to build something better, something they can't touch, can't twist, can't erase. Her hands opened slightly as if planting a seed into the space between them all. That's why today, I'm proposing we launch the Rewrite the Future Foundation. A low gasp moved through the crowd, not loud but sharp, like the first crack of lightning before a summer storm. Oprah's gaze held steady, brighter now, brighter than anger, brighter than fear. Not just to fight injustice, but to outgrow it, to outbuild it, to teach the next generation that they don't have to wait for a seat. They can design the whole damn house. She let the silence settle, not out of hesitation, but to let the enormity of the idea take root. Her voice dropped lower, and somehow it pulled everyone closer. Imagine scholarships that don't just reward those who play by the old rules, but lift up those rewriting them. She moved her hand across the table slowly, as if sketching a blueprint none of them could see yet, but all of them could feel. Imagine funding programs that teach kids not just to dream, but to own their dreams, to protect them, to build futures no one can auction off or tear down. The room shifted again, a collective leaning forward, hearts and minds drawn toward the flame of possibility. Oprah's voice deepened, each word hammering against the past that had tried so hard to cage them. We are not just rewriting stories, we are rewriting what's possible. She paused then, letting the truth hum through the bones of every person sitting there. Rewrite the future isn't about asking permission. It's about making sure no one ever has to ask again. The room vibrated with the energy of a dream too long deferred, and for the first time, it felt like the future wasn't just an idea. It was a door, wide open, daring someone to step through. Jasmine rose from her seat with a quiet certainty, the fabric of her jacket whispering against the chair as she stood. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. The room leaned into her as if it already knew that the next words would be written somewhere permanent, somewhere lasting. She placed her hands firmly on the edge of the table, grounding herself not just in the moment, but in the generations watching through her. When she spoke, her voice was low, steady, the kind of sound that doesn't need to shout to cut through steel. "We can't wait for permission to matter anymore," she said, her gaze moving deliberately across every face, not asking for belief, commanding it. "I will go to Congress. I will fight for a bill that locks federal funding into the future of our HBCUs, not as favors, not as footnotes, but as a foundation." She inhaled slowly, the weight of history coiling around her spine and making her stand taller. "Our schools built leaders when the world wouldn't even call us citizens. They built doctors, judges, presidents, without applause, without backup." Her fingers pressed harder into the table, and the room felt the tremor of it. "It's time we built something that honors what they gave us and protects what's still to come." For a breathless moment, no one moved. Jasmine's chest rose and fell with slow deliberation, her next words carrying not just her own weight, but the silent, aching hopes of thousands. "I won't lobby politely and accept a watered-down compromise," she continued, each word sharpening like a blade. "I will stand until it is written, signed, and sealed that our future will no longer depend on charity." Her voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from the sheer force of belief behind it, and the room leaned closer. "We deserve schools that don't have to patch leaking ceilings while dreaming of changing the world. We deserve more than survival. We deserve strength." She turned her body fully toward the crowd now, offering herself not as a leader perched above them, but as one of them, forged from the same fire. "And if it takes every breath I have left," she said, "I will see it done." The walls of the hall seemed to pulse with her words, each syllable laying stone after stone on a road none of them were willing to turn away from now. Oprah moved beside her, silent but unshakable, and Jasmine met her eyes with a nod that carried years of unspoken battles behind it. Together, standing shoulder to shoulder, they spoke, not with the theatrics of a rally, but with the sacred weight of a covenant. "We are not here to build monuments to ourselves. We are here to build roads for those who will come after us." The words didn't fall like applause lines. They fell like vows, ancient and binding. For a heartbeat, the world outside that room ceased to exist. Then slowly at first, almost timidly, the first hands came together. One clap, two, hesitant, almost reverent. But the hesitation didn't last. It cracked open into a storm. People surged to their feet, chairs scraping against the floor like the sound of walls falling down. Applause roared through the hall, not polished or polite, but raw and uneven. A storm born from every scar they had carried silently until this moment. Some clapped with their hands high above their heads. Some simply pressed a hand over their chest, feeling the drumbeat of belonging pounding against their ribs. Tears streamed openly down faces that didn't bother to hide anymore. It wasn't just celebration. It wasn't just agreement. It was a collective uprising of hope. Louder, fiercer, more unstoppable than anything any of them had ever dared to imagine. The thunder of applause still echoed against the high ceilings, but somewhere beneath it, a softer vibration began to stir, a trembling of hearts on the edge of something they hadn't dared believe could be real, a dream made flesh. Oprah turned slightly, her profile caught in the low golden light, the lines of her face not worn, but carved, each a testament to battles survived, dreams stubbornly kept alive. She didn't raise her voice to meet the roaring crowd. Instead, she let it fall into a hush, so quiet that it pulled the entire room back toward her, like a tide retreating before a wave. She leaned closer to the microphone, but spoke as if it wasn't even there, as if she were whispering directly into the soul of every person watching. "Become the person you once wished had been there for you," she said, her voice low, her words falling like stones into a still lake. The simplicity of it was devastating. It stripped away politics, ambition, applause. It reached back through years of loneliness, through rooms where no one came to save you, through silent prayers spoken by children too small to understand what they were asking for. The moment cracked open, raw and holy, the kind of silence where you could hear the walls breathing. Jasmine stood frozen for a second, her throat working against the sudden swell of feeling that rose too fast, too fierce to control. She blinked hard, but the tears escaped anyway, catching the sharp lights overhead and turning them into stars that blurred her vision. Her hands trembled slightly at her sides, not from weakness, but from the weight of standing face to face with a wish she had carried so long it had almost become myth. She opened her mouth once, closed it, then finally found the strength to lift her eyes to Oprah's. When she spoke, her voice cracked wide open, and she didn't care who saw. "You are that person for me," she whispered, the words tumbling out, raw, unpolished, more real than anything she had ever said in her life. "You were the light I couldn't find, the voice that said, 'Survive anyway. Dream anyway.'" Jasmine's chest heaved with the effort of saying it out loud, but she didn't look away. She needed Oprah to see it. She needed every scar she carried to be witnessed and honored. And Oprah, standing steady in front of her, received it all without flinching. For a heartbeat, neither woman moved. Then Oprah opened her arms, simple, unforced, and Jasmine stepped into them without hesitation, the way a child steps into shelter after too many storms. The embrace wasn't polite, it wasn't staged, it was fierce, trembling with everything words could never fully capture. The long, brutal ache of dreams deferred, the deep, stubborn love that survived anyway. Jasmine buried her face into Oprah's shoulder, and for a moment, the whole room seemed to lean forward, holding its breath. This wasn't history made on a grand stage. This was history made in the breaking and mending of a human heart. Oprah closed her arms tighter around Jasmine, resting her cheek briefly atop the younger woman's head. And when she closed her eyes, it was as if she gathered every lost girl, every silenced voice, every battered dream into that one impossible embrace. The sound that broke over the room next wasn't applause. Not yet. It was the sound of 100, 200, 500 people gasping quietly, a wave of breath sucked in all at once. Some clutched at their chests, some pressed their hands over their mouths. Tears streamed freely down faces old and young, black and brown and white. Not because of pain, but because for once the distance between survival and triumph had collapsed into nothing but the space of two arms wrapped around each other. The walls seemed to blur, the lights shimmered. Jasmine and Oprah stood in the center of it all, two flames braided together, refusing to be extinguished. Around them, history rewrote itself, not with headlines or signatures, but with the beating hearts of a people who understood, viscerally, what it meant to be seen and chosen and carried forward. Then slowly the applause began again, not wild but swelling, gathering force like an ocean tide. People rose to their feet in waves, the sound growing, roaring, filling every corner of the room and crashing against the walls like thunder. Some people clapped through tears that blurred the room into light and shadow. Others simply pressed their hands together at their hearts, as if praying with their whole bodies. It wasn't just admiration rising from the floorboards. It was relief. It was gratitude. It was generations' worth of longing given form at last. The clapping grew louder, faster, desperate almost, not to celebrate the victory of two women, but to hold on to the fleeting, shattering beauty of what they had just witnessed. Jasmine finally stepped back, wiping at her face with a laugh that cracked into a sob halfway through. Oprah smiled, a slow, radiant thing that seemed to light her from the inside, and reached out to brush Jasmine's cheek lightly with her fingers, a benediction and a blessing. They didn't need to say anything more. The moment had already said it all. This is what it looks like when survival becomes legacy, and the crowd standing shoulder to shoulder, hands raw from clapping, eyes wet and shining, knew they had seen something that didn't happen often enough in this world. Not just power, not just history, but hope, made real, made flesh, made unstoppable. As Jasmine and Oprah stepped back from their embrace, the electricity they had sparked didn't fade. It spread, moving like wildfire through every heart in the room and beyond its walls, faster than anyone could have prepared for. Somewhere in the thick of the applause, a camera flash caught them. The moment Oprah and Jasmine's hands clasped under the still falling stage lights, two generations of fight and hope welded into a single blinding image. The photo didn't just capture a gesture, it captured a revolution, suspended in a single heartbeat. Within minutes, the image hit the first news feed, first local, then national. Within hours, it was everywhere, carried like a spark on dry wind across a country aching for something real to believe in. Television anchors paused mid-broadcast to flash it across their screens. Journalists who had spent weeks chasing scandals dropped everything to write about a handshake. It wasn't the composition that mattered or the lighting. It was the weight of it, the defiance, the unity, the unspoken promise that this time, maybe history wouldn't be forgotten 5 minutes later. The photo wasn't staged. It didn't need to be. It was truth in its purest, most dangerous form. And America, whether it was ready or not, saw it. By nightfall, the image had been shared millions of times. It appeared on Instagram stories, framed by trembling hands, on TikTok videos stitched into testimonies from kids who had never before felt brave enough to speak, on Twitter threads filled with fire and raw memory. Someone somewhere, no one knew who, coined the hashtag number sign, rewrite the future. And like dry timber snapping into flame, the words caught. They leapt from post to post, from city to city, a code, a prayer, a dare written in neon ink across the digital sky. It wasn't just a hashtag, it was a rallying cry. It moved faster than algorithms could cage it, faster than trolls could smear it. It was whispered between kids crammed into bus stops and shouted by teens pacing back and forth, in bedrooms wallpapered with secondhand dreams. It scrawled itself in sidewalk chalk across campuses. It lit up handmade posters taped to windows in neighborhoods that had been written off and forgotten. In a country used to short attention spans and disposable outrage, something different was happening. Rewrite the future wasn't a trend, it was an ignition. In Detroit, a 17-year-old girl stood trembling in front of a packed gymnasium, a borrowed microphone shaking in her hand, telling the story of how her brother had been expelled from school for speaking out against racist teachers. In Birmingham, a young man posted a video that went viral overnight, his voice cracking as he described how his mother still worked two jobs because her degree from an HBCU didn't open the same doors. In Los Angeles, a kid no one had ever heard of posted a single sentence. They told me I was too loud to matter, but today my story matters too. And somehow, that one line was shared over 1 million times in less than a day. Stories poured out like water breaking through a dam that had held for too long. Stories that had been kept small out of fear. Stories that had been folded into polite corners, hidden from sight. Now they flooded the streets. They flooded the timelines. They flooded the country with a raw, breathtaking humanity that no pundit, no politician, no hate group could twist back into silence. And at the center of the storm stood that single, unbreakable image. Oprah and Jasmine, standing hand in hand, looking out at the world not with anger, but with relentless, merciful courage. News networks tried to catch up. They scrambled to book interviews with the kids telling their truths. Talk shows scrambled to adjust their scripts to cover the movement without sounding like they had missed the entire point. Celebrities tweeted in support, but for once it wasn't their voices that mattered most. It was the ones who had never been given a microphone before, the ones whose pain had been background noise until someone finally dared to call it music. In every corner of the country, something ancient and fragile and furious began to pulse. A knowing that the future wasn't just something that happened, it was something you wrote, line by bloody line, story by defiant story. Jasmine watched it all unfold from a small hotel room hours after the event ended, still in the same clothes, her hair mussed, her makeup worn away by tears and time. She scrolled through the posts with trembling hands, heart pounding, with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite hope, but something bigger, something she didn't yet have a name for. Beside her, Oprah sat quietly, her phone untouched on the nightstand, her gaze soft but fierce. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. The roar of a new generation rising was loud enough to fill the silence between them. Jasmine's throat tightened as she scrolled past a video of a boy, couldn't be more than 12, standing on a cracked playground and shouting into a cheap phone camera. I matter, I matter, I matter. 3 words, a revolution. Oprah reached out, laying a hand lightly over Jasmine's. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a warning. It was a reminder. This is what happens when you dare to hold the line long enough for someone else to step through. Outside, the city lights blinked against the darkness, a Morse code of possibilities. Somewhere across the streets and screens, another kid was picking up their phone, finding the courage to say, maybe for the first time, this is my story too. And the future, the real future, the one no one could unwrite now, shuddered into motion, fierce and unstoppable. The morning after the photo went viral, the country woke up different. Not louder, not flashier, just heavier, like the ground itself had absorbed a new weight. The usual noise of the news cycle, celebrity gossip, political backbiting, endless commercials, seemed to hush for once, pushed aside by something bigger that no one could quite name yet. Cities stirred awake slower, like people were sensing something sacred had cracked open and weren't sure yet how to step into it. Street vendors setting up their stalls in Chicago paused to watch a clip of Jasmine and Oprah on their phones, their fingers hovering over touchscreen screens, momentarily forgetting their tasks. In Harlem, an old man sweeping the sidewalk outside a barber shop wiped his hands on his apron and muttered under his breath, "Took long enough." No breaking news alert captured it. No anchor framed it with scripted gravitas. It wasn't a headline. It was a shift in the bones of a country that had too often pretended it had no ghosts. In schools, the ripple was sharper, faster. By mid-morning, teachers found their classes unusually restless, not with disruption, but with a buzzing undercurrent they couldn't quite place. Students who had never spoken much raised their hands. Girls who had always kept their heads down looked teachers in the eye. In one history class in Baltimore, a sophomore named Angelique stood up unprompted and asked why their curriculum didn't cover any leaders who looked like her outside of February. In a civics class in Birmingham, a boy who barely scraped by in grades delivered a trembling but defiant mini-speech about rewriting voter suppression laws. No one had assigned these moments. No one had graded them. And yet across the country, a silent march began. Through corridors lined with faded flags, through metal detectors humming at the entrances, through tired fluorescent-lit halls. These weren't protests, not yet. They were declarations, quiet and unstoppable. We are still here. We are still rising. And we refuse to stay invisible. By the afternoon, community centers that had sat half-empty for years found themselves flooded. In Detroit, a library basement intended for a dozen teens overflowed with 80, their voices crashing against each other, loud, clumsy, hungry. Some had notebooks clenched in their hands, pages filled with hastily scribbled poems, demands, dreams. Some just brought their raw selves, battered and brilliant, demanding a space to be seen. Elders showed up too, grandmothers carrying folding chairs and stories too heavy for one lifetime. They didn't come to scold or manage. They came to bear witness, to offer nods and worn hands pressed against young shoulders, passing down something older than speeches: endurance. In Atlanta, an open mic scheduled for 20 kids stretched past midnight, every chair filled, kids standing shoulder to shoulder against the walls, waiting not just for their turn to speak, but for their turn to exist out loud. The march wasn't organized. It wasn't polished. There were no polished banners, no sponsorships, no camera-ready slogans. There were kids on bicycles passing flyers printed on borrowed copy machines. There were teenagers chalking "Need to rewrite the future" on cracked sidewalks in neighborhoods too many politicians had promised and abandoned. There were young women carving the words into the margins of their textbooks during math class, boys scratching it onto the backs of cafeteria trays, graffiti artists spraying it onto the brick skeletons of abandoned malls. Every place America had forgotten became a canvas. Every voice it had tried to silence became an anthem. This wasn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was reclamation of spaces, of names, of futures wrestled back from hands that had held them hostage too long. Social media, always restless, bent under the weight of it. At first, journalists tried to explain it away, calling it youth activism like it was something tidy, manageable. Then the hashtags flooded faster than they could file their reports. Stories piled on stories, videos stitched to videos. Thousands of young faces speaking not to politicians, but to each other. One post from a girl in Jackson, Mississippi, went viral within hours. They told us history was written by the victors, so we're writing ours in real time. It wasn't crafted for attention. It wasn't slick or sound-bitten. That was why it caught fire. Because it was true. Because it was unfinished. Because it belonged to everyone who read it and felt their own lungs expand wider than the cages built around them. In towns where graduation rates hovered just above despair, valedictorians used their moment on stage to speak not of scholarships, but of injustice. In cities where gunfire too often sang the night to sleep, teenagers marched, not with polished chants, but with the broken hymns of lives snatched too soon. They marched past boarded-up factories, past churches turned into dollar stores, past empty lots that once dreamed of parks. They marched with their heads high, their fists low, but their stories lit like torches inside them. Not demanding to be saved, demanding to be seen, demanding that the world stop rewriting their futures without them at the table. Somewhere in New Orleans, a boy with a skateboard slung over his shoulder scrawled the hashtag across the hood of a broken-down car, abandoned on a street corner. In Oakland, a group of teens spray-painted a basketball court wall overnight with the names of Black writers, artists, dreamers who had built legacies with nothing but paper and rage. In Miami, a shy 12-year-old recorded herself reading a letter to her future self and posted it online, her voice shaking so hard she almost couldn't get the words out. Don't give up, even when they act like you were never meant to be here. Especially then. It racked up 3 million views in a week. Not because she was famous, but because she was fearless in a way fame could never teach. There were mistakes, of course, missteps, anger spilling over into shouting matches, old wounds flaring hot between communities who had more in common than they realized. But the movement didn't shatter. It grew. It grew because it wasn't built on personalities. It wasn't built on polished leaders or viral campaigns. It was built on the simple, savage need to be heard, to be counted, to be impossible to erase. It was built, ironically, the way all true revolutions are built, messily, painfully, beautifully, in the hands of the ones the world had counted out too soon. And through it all, the image of Oprah and Jasmine, hand in hand under a single beam of light, floated above it like a North Star. Not because they were perfect, not because they had promised easy victories, but because they had shown that survival could be welded into hope, and that hope could be turned into fuel. In interviews, Jasmine refused to claim the spotlight, pushing instead for the focus to stay on the movement itself. Oprah, when asked, simply smiled and said, "The story was never about us. It was always about what comes next. What came next wasn't a moment. It wasn't even a movement. It was a march, silent, relentless, unstoppable, step by step, breath by breath, toward a future that, for the first time in too long, belonged to those who dared to write it themselves." The steps of the Capitol had seen history before. Protests, speeches, broken promises echoing into marble halls. But that morning the air tasted different. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't blind hope. It was the sharp, metallic taste of something raw being forged, not behind closed doors, but right there in the open, under the hard glare of a rising sun. Jasmine stood at the top of the steps, a folded document clutched in one hand, her other hand trembling slightly at her side. She wasn't wearing a designer suit. She wasn't flanked by handlers. Just her and a circle of supporters, young, old, worn, fierce, crowding behind her like a living wall. Her heart pounded against her ribs, not from fear, but from the sacred weight of what she carried. A draft of the new bill that would fund HBCUs not as charity, but as birthright. She looked down once at the heavy streets below, the world waking up slowly, unaware, or maybe unwilling, to realize it was about to be rewritten. Jasmine didn't need them to know. She needed only to hold the line. She raised the paper high above her head, the morning sun slicing through it like a blade through smoke. For a breathless second, everything stopped. The murmuring crowd fell silent. Even the stiff spring breeze seemed to still. Then a voice rang out from somewhere in the crowd. Not a chant, not a slogan, but a single sharp cry. "Rewrite it, Jasmine!" And just like that, the air cracked open. The small group of witnesses erupted in cheers that shattered the stillness, that slapped against the hard stone buildings and bounced back again, louder. Jasmine felt it surge up through her feet, through her spine, through the hand that gripped the bill tighter than she realized. She knew this was only the beginning. She knew there would be hearings, backlash, ugly headlines waiting for her in tomorrow's papers, but she also knew something even truer. Beginnings were meant to be messy. Progress was supposed to be loud, unruly, bloodied. No one had ever won the future by asking for it nicely. Jasmine pressed the folded bill against her chest for a heartbeat, a silent vow stitched under her skin. Behind her, the crowd wasn't clapping for a piece of paper. They were clapping for every broken promise it dared to challenge. As she took her first step down the stairs, leading them forward, the sun climbed higher over the Capitol dome, casting her shadow long and dark and unbroken across the stone. It wasn't a march of thousands yet. It wasn't a law yet, but it was a promise, burning bright in a city built to extinguish it. And this time, the fire was just getting started. As Jasmine disappeared into the swelling tide of voices, one truth rose unshakable from the roar. This was no ending. It was a beginning carved in fire. The story wasn't about winning a single battle. It was about refusing to vanish. Jasmine and Oprah showed that survival is its own revolution, and that every scar carried forward is a weapon, not a wound. They proved that change isn't given. It's taken, carved out with raw hands and untamed hope. Against a world built to erase them, they didn't bow. They built new roads. They rewrote the rules. And through them, every quiet voice now knows, you don't have to ask permission to exist. You just have to stand, speak, and burn bright enough that no one can look away. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.